Tonight, we travel back to a time when stone towers rose like lotus buds over endless plains, their carvings glowing faintly in the torchlight of a city that never seemed to sleep. The Khmer Empire is at its zenith, and you are walking among the bustling streets of Angkor, Tom, hearing the clang of bronze bells from the temples and the soft chatter of merchants trading silks and spices. The air smells faintly of incense and wood smoke, and elephants plod patiently along broad avenues lined with statues of gods and demons locked in their eternal tug-of-war. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You step into the world of the 12th century, a time when King Jayavarman VII presides with a mix of iron resolve and spiritual devotion. His face, immortalized on stone towers at Bayon, stares in every direction as if watching over you personally. Roads stretch for miles, linking far-flung provinces. Waterways crisscross like veins, feeding the lifeblood of rice fields that stretch as far as the horizon. This is an empire that commands not just land, but imagination. The Khmer have mastered hydraulic engineering, building reservoirs so vast they resemble inland seas, and an intricate network of canals that makes the fields thrive even in dry seasons. Scholars today still marvel at this system, arguing whether it was the most advanced in pre-modern Southeast Asia. You might be thinking, wow, medieval urban planning was a thing, and yes, it very much was. The temples, oh the temples, Angkor. What itself rises like a stone mountain aligned with cosmic order. You notice how its towers mimic Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods, and you feel small yet oddly comforted under their shadow. Even at night, the stars seem to hang directly above its spires, as if drawn there by some celestial magnet. Every surface teems with stories, epic battles, divine dances, and even mundane moments carved in bas-relief. The artisans must have chuckled at some of these details. One panel even shows a man picking lice out of another's hair. Who knew that 12th century artists were the original pranksters? Trade routes hum with activity. From the distant coasts, Chinese ceramics and Indian textiles arrive, blending with Khmer crafts in markets alive, with voices speaking a dozen tongues. You can almost taste the spices in the air, a hint of cinnamon mixing with the earthy smell of the jungle beyond the walls. Ships dock at ports, elephants haul goods inland, and the empire's wealth piles higher than the tallest palm tree. Historians agree this was a time of economic and cultural power unmatched in the region. Yet they also whisper about how prosperity sometimes breeds complacency, and the seeds of decline can sprout in the richest soil. Religion here is not static. It evolves layers upon layers. Hinduism dominates earlier, with kings declaring themselves Devaraja, god kings. But now Buddhism spreads softly like a breeze changing direction. Jayavarman VII himself champions Mahayana Buddhism, filling the empire with serene statues of the Buddha. The shift is peaceful, but you can feel how every change in belief subtly shifts the balance of authority. Even now, historians debate whether these transitions smoothed the empire's path or slowly loosened its unity. As you wander through the city gates at dusk, the jungle beyond seems to breathe with its own rhythm. Somewhere out there, nature waits patiently, always ready to reclaim what humans build. For now, though, the city stands strong, the empire at its most confident. You hear the distant laughter of children, the chanting of monks, and the rhythmic pounding of rice husks being prepared for the evening meal. The stars are bright, and you feel the calm before a storm you cannot yet name, because in this golden age everything looks eternal until it isn't. You wake to a sky streaked with silver clouds, the monsoon's breath heavy in the air, And you begin to notice that the rhythm of Angkor's life depends entirely on water. It is not just a resource, it is a deity in liquid form. The canals glitter in the morning sun, reservoirs, berets spread like mirrors of the heavens, and rice fields glisten, promising harvests to come. But as you trace these waters with your eyes, you sense an unease curling beneath the surface. Scholars today argue over whether the climate turned treacherous, shifting like a friend who suddenly stops returning your calls. Evidence from tree rings and lake sediments whispers of severe droughts striking between the late 13th and early 15th centuries, punctuated by violent monsoons that came too hard, too fast. Imagine walking across the West Beret during one of these droughts. The vast reservoir, once shimmering and full, lies cracked and parched, in places its waterline shrinking like a receding hope. The farmers look up at the sky with furrowed brows, murmuring prayers to gods who seem unusually silent. Crops fail and the granaries empty far too quickly. Historians still argue whether these extreme climate swings were enough on their own to cripple the empire, or whether they merely exposed cracks already forming in Angkor's grand facade. It's like wondering whether the straw or the camel's bad back came first. Then the rain returns, but not gently. Monsoon storms slam into the land, roaring through the night, turning fields into floods and canals into chaos. You can almost hear the wind tearing through palm leaves and the pounding rain battering the temple stones. The clever hydraulic system that once balanced dry and wet seasons suddenly struggles. Embankments collapse, channels clog, and fields drown. Some modern researchers suspect that the water network, so advanced it seemed invincible, actually became a liability when storms grew too fierce. Over-engineered, they say, like a car with too many buttons, great when it works, a nightmare when it doesn't. Meanwhile, the people adapt as best they can. Farmers rebuild dikes, dig new channels, and hope the next season will be kinder. But as the cycles of drought and flood repeat, resilience wears thin. Famine whispers at the edges of villages, forcing families to move, leaving rice paddies untended. You pass through abandoned hamlets where wooden houses lean like old men and weeds tangle through empty doorways. The air feels heavy, as though even the spirits have packed up and left. Interestingly, while many historians focus on this climate story, others caution against seeing nature as the sole villain. They argue that the empire survived bad weather before, and that human decisions, political, economic, religious, played just as large a role. There's a fringe theory too, almost poetic, suggesting that the empire grew so confident in controlling water that it forgot to fear it, a bit like someone who buys flood insurance and then builds a house on a riverbank. You chuckle at the thought, but it lingers because maybe there's truth there. As night falls again, you stand by a temple pool reflecting the stars, and you imagine how villagers once gathered here, whispering about the strange patterns in the sky and the rivers. For them, the gods were sending messages through every raindrop and every crack in the earth. For you, centuries later, the message feels more like a riddle. Did the skies themselves turn against Angkor, or did humans simply fail to listen to what the clouds were trying to say? You follow the paths of the canals at dawn mist, rising from the water, like ghosts reluctant to leave. These waterways once made Angkor the envy of the region, a sprawling network that funneled life to every field and every home. You watch as farmers guide water through channels, and for a moment everything looks perfect, smooth, balanced, controlled. But then your gaze catches on a collapsed embankment, and you notice weeds sprouting where water should flow. Something is off, and it makes your steps slower, more cautious. Historians still argue whether the water system failed because the climate turned harsh, because maintenance lapsed, or because its very complexity became its weakness. Imagine thousands of kilometers of canals and dikes needing constant care, just one weak link and the chain begins to unravel. Archaeologists point to evidence of sediment buildup clogging channels, as if nature slowly choked the empire's arteries. Some suggest that royal focus shifted from infrastructure to grand temples, leaving workers spread thin. It's a debate like an endless tug of war, and you can almost hear scholars grumbling about it over coffee. Walking along the edges of the Great East Baray, you see where water once sparkled. Now parts have dried into patches of cracked mud. Villagers whisper legends about Nagas, the serpent spirits turning their backs on the empire. It's a myth, sure, but myths often echo real fears. You picture workers sweating under the sun, digging, clearing, repairing, yet never quite catching up with what nature undoes each year. Maintenance might have become a losing battle, like trying to keep a sandcastle perfect while the tide creeps closer. And then there's the rain. When it comes, it's not a gentle friend, but a violent guest smashing through channels and breaking embankments. Some scientists studying ancient flood patterns believe torrential storms ripped apart parts of the system, leaving scars still visible today. Imagine the roar of water rushing where it shouldn't, sweeping away wooden bridges and drowning fields meant to feed thousands. You shiver, even though the air is warm. Yet not everyone agrees this collapse of hydraulics spelled the end. Some argue that while the waterworks suffered, the empire could have adapted, if not for other pressures, wars, trade shifts, and internal strife. Others say the system's breakdown was a slow bleed, weakening Angkor, so that when other crises arrived, it simply couldn't stand. And then there's a quirky theory. Some believe the water network wasn't entirely lost, just abandoned strategically when rulers moved focus elsewhere. Like a king deciding, we don't need this giant reservoir anymore, while peasants in the fields probably disagreed. You kneel by a small overgrown canal, running your fingers through the still water. The reflection of the trees ripples and bends, and you can't help but see Angkor itself in that shifting surface, once clear and strong, now fragmented. A frog croaks somewhere, as if to remind you that life goes on even when empires fade. As evening settles, the jungle hums louder, almost as if mocking the silence of the abandoned channels. Fireflies dance over stagnant pools, tiny lanterns illuminating the remnants of human ambition. You breathe in the damp, earthy air and realize that water life's greatest gift can just as easily become the quiet architect of downfall when balance is lost. And you wonder, as many scholars do, whether this network collapsed because of neglect, nature, or a perfect storm of both. You wander away from the canals and toward the edges of the city, where the jungle presses close like a curious neighbor. The air smells of wet leaves and ancient bark, and vines dangle like lazy snakes across crumbling stone. Here, nature has not just crept back, it has marched forward with quiet determination. Temples stand half buried in green, their carvings smothered under moss, and roots twist through the walls as if trying to reclaim every grain of sand. You brush your fingers against a tree so massive it seems to hug the stones beneath it, and you wonder who is embracing whom, tree or temple. Historians still argue whether this overgrowth reflects the empire's environmental collapse or simply the natural passage of time. Some point to deforestation during Angkor's height, where vast swathes of jungle were cleared for rice fields, timber, and construction. When the climate turned fickle, the bare land eroded rivers, silted, and fertility faded. Others say the forest's return was a slow reclamation after the city's population declined, a green blanket covering wounds left by human hands. You can almost hear the scholars in their debates. Was it environmental mismanagement or just time doing what time always does? You step through Tarprom, the temple, where trees grow like guardians, their roots draped over doorways as if sealing secrets inside. Birds flutter above monkeys, chatter somewhere out of sight, and the only human sound is your own breath. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Early French explorers who rediscovered these ruins were so enchanted by the jungle's grip that they decided to leave Tarprom mostly as they found it, with roots and branches wrapped around the stones. It's as if even they recognized that the trees had become part of the temple's soul. Some researchers see this encroachment as symbolic nature reclaiming what humans thought they could control. There's even a fringe theory that the forest spread was faster than expected because abandoned fields provided perfect open ground for seedlings. Others suggest that the jungle's embrace happened long after Angkor's fall, and the overgrowth we see today is a centuries-long process rather than a dramatic, overnight takeover. Either way, walking here feels like stepping into a dream where time loops and boundaries blur. At dusk, you sit on a fallen lintel, the stones still warm from the day's sun, and listen to the symphony of cicadas rising around you. The temples glow faintly under the last light, their towers peeking through the canopy like lost islands in a green sea. The smell of damp earth rises mingled with the faint scent of flowers you can't quite name. For a moment you close your eyes and imagine what it was like for the last inhabitants who watched their city being swallowed day by day. Did they feel sadness, or perhaps relief, as the jungle offered them cover and comfort in their final days here? A soft breeze rustles the leaves and you smile at the irony. The jungle was once the empire's ally, offering timber food and medicine. In the end, it became the silent heir, reclaiming everything with patience. You rise, brushing off moss from your hands, and step deeper into the green, feeling both humbled and strangely comforted by how gently nature erases even the greatest of human ambitions. You leave the sheltering trees and head toward the wide plains beyond Angkor, where rumors of marching feet seem to echo across the centuries. The ground feels different here, trampled, hardened by footsteps long gone. This is where foreign shadows entered the story, where the empire's walls were tested not by weather or time, but by human ambition. You picture armies moving like dark rivers, the Cham in the late 12th century, striking with sudden fury. Later, Siamese forces pushing in waves from Ayutthaya, and somewhere in between other rivals watching for cracks in Angkor's armor. The Cham invasion of 1177 stands out like a scar in Khmer memory. You imagine their war canoes slicing up the Mekong and Tonle Sap raiders, storming into Angkor Thom, and chaos erupting among temples that had never expected to see battles so close. Yet King Jayavarman VII rose from that disaster-turning defeat into a rallying cry. He rebuilt the city stronger, grander, as if to say, "Nice try, but we're still here." Historians agree this resilience is part of what made Angkor's golden age so brilliant. Still, they wonder if this victory came at a cost, stretching resources too thin like a candle, burning brighter just before it gutters out. Centuries later, Ayutthaya emerged as the empire's relentless rival. You hear the whispers of 14th and 15th century battles, the sound of drums and elephants clashing in the distance. Some records say Siamese armies raided Angkor, repeatedly sacking the city around 1431, though details blur through time like ink smudged by rain. Did they truly conquer Angkor, or was the city already crumbling from within? Historians still argue whether this final blow was decisive or merely symbolic, a predator claiming a prize already left unguarded. You find it oddly fascinating how some scholars downplay the role of war, altogether arguing that Angkor's decline was more a slow fading than a dramatic fall. Others insist the invasions were pivotal, pointing to how power shifted southward toward Phnom Penh afterward. A few even entertain the idea that the Siamese sack was exaggerated, later a convenient tale to explain what was really a quiet relocation of power. You chuckle softly. History loves drama, but the truth often mumbles. Along the edges of the old causeways you notice carvings of warriors, their faces calm despite the weapons they carry. Perhaps they believed the gods fought beside them. There's a quirky story of elephants trained to break through enemy lines, their tusks sheathed in blades. Imagine the mix of awe and terror that sight must have sparked. Whether or not those stories are embellished, they add to the atmosphere of an age where every battle was half legend, half reality. As the sun dips low, casting the stones in fiery hues, you stand where countless soldiers once marched, and you feel the weight of their footsteps in the earth. The jungle may have been patient, the canals fragile, but here on this open plain, it was human ambition and violence that left the loudest echoes. You realize that for every theory blaming drought or trade or religion, there's another pointing to swords and fire as the true agents of Angkor's downfall. You can almost hear the distant clang of metal fading into the night, reminding you that sometimes even the mightiest cities fall not with a whisper, but with the clash of armies under a blood-red sky. You return to the heart of the empire where temple bells once rang out under skies thick with incense, and you notice the statues looking different now. The fierce Hindu gods, Shiva dancing, Vishnu striding, still stand proud, but around them the serene faces of the Buddha multiply calm and detached. You trace the stone with your fingertips, feeling the shift carved into the very walls. This is a place where faith itself changed, and with it perhaps the empire's foundations. The Khmer kings had long wrapped their power in divine robes, proclaiming themselves Devaraja, the god-king, earthly embodiment of the divine. Under Hinduism, their rule felt tied to cosmic order, as rigid and eternal as the temples they built. Then came Mahayana Buddhism flowing in during the reign of Jayavarman VII like a quiet tide. Instead of gods of war and fire, the new symbols were compassion and enlightenment, and the king styled himself as a bodhisattva, a savior in human form. Historians still argue whether this transition strengthened the empire through moral unity or weakened it by loosening the king's divine grip on power. You wander through Bayon where smiling faces gaze in every direction, and you imagine how people once felt walking here. Did they see a kinder kingdom, one focused on healing after war, or did they whisper about the old gods fading, worried that cosmic protection was slipping away? There's a fringe theory that the religious shift created tensions among elites tied to Hindu traditions, sparking quiet unrest in the palace corridors. Others dismiss this, claiming that Cambodian society blended faiths so seamlessly that no one really panicked, because why not have both blessings just in case? The change wasn't just spiritual, it altered the city's very rhythm. Temples became centers of charity, hospitals were built, and relief work flourished. Yet ironically, these projects drained resources, demanding manpower and wealth at a time when other threats loomed. Some scholars suggest that Jayavarman VII's massive building campaigns, despite their beauty, strained the empire's economy like an over-generous host throwing one too many lavish parties. You can almost hear him saying, "Don't worry, we'll rebuild again," while treasurers quietly sweat in the background. Later, Theravada Buddhism crept in from neighboring regions, replacing the Mahayana emphasis on kingly salvation with a focus on individual paths to enlightenment. This was less about royal divinity and more about personal discipline, and you can sense how that may have shifted the people's loyalty. Historians debate whether the king lost some of his sacred aura during this change, making the throne less central to daily life. A few suggest this religious evolution softened the empire's defenses not militarily but psychologically, leaving it less cohesive when hard times came. As dusk falls, monks in saffron robes walk silently between temple courtyards, their chants rising like smoke into the twilight. The air smells of lotus and old stone. You sit on a step, watching the shadows lengthen, and you think about how belief can both build and unbuild worlds. Angkor's stones remain, but the faith that first crowned them shifted like water, leaving behind questions no historian has fully answered. You smile at the thought sometimes the gentlest changes reshape empires more than wars ever could. You drift south along the ancient roads, tracing where merchants once carried spices, ceramics and silk under the blazing sun. The air smells faintly of dust and the ghost of cinnamon, and you can almost hear the creak of ox carts and the chatter of traders haggling in multiple tongues. Angkor thrived not only on its temples and rice, but also on its place in a vast network of exchange connecting India, China, and the islands beyond. Yet as you walk, you notice the road feels emptier, the market stalls quieter in your imagination. Something in the flow has slowed like a river losing its current. Historians still argue whether Angkor's decline was partly economic, caused by the fading of its trade dominance. As maritime routes gained favor bypassing inland centers, like Angkor, wealth may have shifted to coastal hubs where ships could dock easily. You can picture merchants choosing new ports, unloading their goods where the sea kissed the land far from the inland temples. Over time, this trickle away from Angkor might have bled it dry, economically speaking. Some scholars describe this as the empire's slow invisibility to trade, as if the world simply stopped noticing it. There's evidence of increasing trade with China during Angkor's height, especially ceramics found in vast quantities, but later records show this connection weakening. At the same time, neighboring polities like Ayutthaya began to control crucial trade choke points, cutting Angkor out of the most lucrative exchanges. You think of it as a medieval version of losing the best spot on the market street. Suddenly everyone is buying from someone else. A quirky theory even suggests that Angkor's intense focus on inland agriculture and monumental building blinded it to changing economic patterns, like someone still selling cassette tapes in the age of streaming. Others disagree, pointing out that trade never fully disappeared and that Angkor's decline cannot be blamed solely on shifting commerce. Perhaps trade was just one strand in a web of troubles. You pass by the remnants of old marketplaces, open spaces where weeds now sprout through stone, and you imagine the laughter of traders who once swapped not only goods, but stories, ideas, and news of distant lands. Without that constant pulse of exchange, the city's heartbeat slowed. The once bustling roads grew quiet, and the voices of foreign merchants faded into the jungle's hum. As the sun dips low, you notice how the evening breeze carries scents from the forest rather than spices from ships. It's a small thing, yet it feels symbolic. Economic decline doesn't roar. It sighs, slowly dimming the lights until you almost don't notice the darkness creeping in. You walk on thinking how every empire depends not only on armies and gods, but also on the steady hum of trade. And when that hum fades, so too does the rhythm of life. You return to the royal palaces where the stones glow with the last light of day, and the air tastes faintly of smoke from cooking fires. Here, power once pulsed like a drumbeat, steady and commanding. Kings ruled as divine figures, their word carried across the land like wind through the rice fields. But as you wander through the remains, you hear faint echoes of arguments behind carved doors, whispers of alliances breaking, and footsteps of courtiers shifting their loyalties. It's here that another theory stirs the idea that Angkor's fall was seeded by its own palace intrigues. Historians still argue whether succession crises weakened the empire more than droughts or invasions ever could. Imagine kings dying without clear heirs, nobles vying for influence, and rival princes plotting under the watchful gaze of stone lions. Every shift in power created ripples, sometimes small, sometimes storms. Some scholars point to evidence of civil conflicts, suggesting that while the empire appeared stable on the surface, its core was fracturing like a beautiful vase, hiding hairline cracks. Jayavarman VII's reign, glorious though it was, may have left the treasury strained and the aristocracy uneasy. His successors faced not just external enemies, but the difficult task of holding a vast realm together amid shifting beliefs, economic pressures, and growing ambitions among provincial governors. Some suggest that local leaders began to act independently, paying less attention to Angkor's throne and more to their own small kingdoms. It's a pattern you've seen in history before. The center loses its grip and the edges quietly pull away. There's a quirky story about one Khmer king so obsessed with constructing monuments that he neglected political stability, as if he believed stone could solve everything. Historians debate how much truth lies in that tale, but it lingers because it fits the narrative of rulers prioritizing image over governance. Others argue this is unfair, claiming that the kings were capable leaders who simply faced impossible odds. After all, even the best king cannot control droughts, trade winds, and human ambition all at once. As night falls over the palace ruins, you picture a royal court bathed in torchlight, voices raised in heated debate. Perhaps one counselor warns of Siamese movements at the borders, while another complains about empty coffers. Somewhere, a prince smiles quietly, knowing the chaos opens a path to his own claim. You feel the tension in the air, thick, invisible, but undeniable. Some scholars believe these political struggles eroded the unity needed to withstand external threats. Without a strong center, armies were slower to gather decisions, slower to make. Others say politics were only part of a larger puzzle, a single piece in an empire unraveling on multiple fronts. Yet standing here, under stars brighter than any torch, you sense how fragile power can be. A kingdom can be lost not with a single battle, but with 1,000 whispered betrayals. The cicadas sing louder as you step away, their chorus drowning out the phantom voices of kings and courtiers. In the quiet night, you realize that power, like faith, like trade, is a thread, and once it frays, no temple or army can sew it back together. You step into the realm of stories where history blurs with legend and facts drift like mist between the trees. Here the air feels charged, not with the certainty of battles or the weight of stone, but with whispers that slip through time. The people who lived through Angkor's final days did not leave neat reports for modern scholars. They left fragments, and in those gaps, myths took root. You sit by an ancient pond, its surface black as a mirror at night, and you listen. One tale tells of a Naga, the great serpent spirit angered by human arrogance. It is said that when the kings forgot their sacred duties, the Naga withdrew its protection, allowing drought and invaders to sweep the land. You smile softly at the drama divine punishment makes for a good story, and it captures the fear people must have felt as their world crumbled. Historians still argue how much weight to give these myths. Are they mere fantasy, or do they encode memories of environmental collapse, political betrayal, or something else entirely? Another legend speaks of a king who vanished into the forest, leaving the city to its fate. Some versions say he fled from an invading army, others claim he walked willingly into the jungle seeking enlightenment. The image of a ruler disappearing into green shadows feels almost too poetic, yet it lingers because it explains what facts cannot: the eerie silence that followed Angkor's abandonment. Quirky, yes, but also hauntingly beautiful. You hear folk stories of treasures hidden under temple floors guarded by spirits who punish the greedy. There are whispers of ghosts wandering to Prom at night, weeping for a lost empire. Travelers in later centuries claim to feel watched among the ruins, as if the stones themselves remembered. Even the French explorers who rediscovered Angkor in the 19th century wrote about the unsettling quiet, the sense of being observed by countless unseen eyes. Perhaps that was just the jungle's trick, but perhaps not. Among scholars, myths are both a blessing and a curse. They illuminate how people understood their own decline, but often mislead, with flourishes that make archaeologists groan. Still, even the most skeptical researchers admit that legends carry emotional truths history books sometimes miss. The Naga's curse may not be real, but it reflects a belief that humans must live in harmony with nature or pay the price. The vanished king may not have literally walked away, but it mirrors the disillusionment of a people watching their leaders fail. As the moon rises high, silvering the leaves and temples, you sense these lost voices mingling with the wind. They do not shout answers. They hum questions. Was the fall of Angkor punishment from God's failure of kings, or the inevitability of time? Perhaps all of these, perhaps none. You lean back, listening to the night creatures, feeling the myths wrap around you like a blanket, soft, uncertain, but strangely comforting. You stand to leave, and for a moment you think you see movement in the shadows of a tree root coiled around a doorway. A trick of the moonlight, surely. Still, you whisper a quiet thank you just in case the spirits are listening, because here, where history fades into legend, it feels polite to say goodnight to both. You step back through all the places you have wandered tonight, the silent canals, the green-cloaked temples, the roads where merchants no longer pass, the palaces where whispers once ruled, and the plains where foreign armies marched. Each path offers you a fragment, but none give the whole picture. The collapse of the Khmer Empire sits like a puzzle with missing pieces, 1,000 theories scattered like stars overhead. You pause, breathing in the warm night air, feeling how the mystery itself is part of the story. Historians still argue whether climate was the decisive force, whether wars delivered the killing blow, whether trade shifts slowly strangled the city, or whether faith and politics eroded its unity from within. Every explanation shines brightly for a moment only to fade when you notice its gaps. Some scholars even combine them all, painting a picture of a perfect storm, where multiple pressures struck at once, each amplifying the other. You can almost hear them debating across centuries. It was the drought, no, it was Ayutthaya. You're both wrong, it was the economy, and somewhere a quiet voice adds, maybe it was everything, and maybe it was just time. A quirky perspective from recent studies suggests that Angkor didn't so much fall as it transformed. Its people, rather than perishing or being driven out entirely, may have simply shifted south, adapting to new realities along the Mekong and toward Phnom Penh. In this view, Angkor's end was less a dramatic collapse and more a gentle fade, like a candle burning down to its wick, still glowing even as the flame shrinks. It's almost comforting to imagine that life continued quietly even as the temples grew still. The ruins that remain are not silent, they hum with memory. Each stone holds traces of prayers whispered centuries ago, each carving a reminder of hands that once shaped gods from rock. The forest does not destroy, it cradles. The sky does not forget, it witnesses. And as you stand here listening to the hum of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves, you realize Angkor's mystery is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt. Theories differ, voices clash, but in the end the Khmer Empire's fall is not a single answer. It is a story told by water and wind, by trees and trade, by battles and beliefs. It is a story still unfolding, every excavation adding a line, every legend a whisper. You smile knowing the truth lies not in choosing one theory, but in holding them all gently like pieces of a mosaic that only makes sense when seen from far away. The moon climbs higher, silvering the spires of Angkor Wat and bathing the ruins in a light so soft it feels like a dream. You take a deep breath, feeling the stillness seep into your bones, and you let the puzzle remain unfinished. After all, mysteries have their own beauty, and now as our journey winds down, let the pace slow. The night around you is warm and steady, the cicadas singing their lullaby, while stars scatter like diamonds across the velvet sky. Imagine lying on the ancient stones, their heat from the day now fading into a gentle warmth under your back. The breeze drifts lazily, carrying the scent of lotus and damp earth, and every sound seems to grow softer, as though the world itself is falling asleep. The jungle's arms close around the ruins, not to smother but to hold, the way a mother cradles a child who has long since stopped struggling. You close your eyes and the theories fade. Climate, war, trade, politics, myths, all dissolving into one long exhale of history. The empire may have fallen, but here, in the quiet, it feels eternal. Let your breath match the rhythm of the night, slow and deep, and allow yourself to drift. The stars will keep watch, the trees will whisper, and the stones will dream for you.